is. Let me put that away. Ugh, there we go. Women! We have extra pockets! Hi, I'm Marianne Miller. I'm a voice actress. That doesn't really matter. We're here to talk about the portrayal of people outside of the white male default in media. And that conversation kind of evolves, like that conversation changes depending on what convention I go to. So really it's just about, sometimes we talk about gender presentation, sometimes we talk about disabilities, sometimes we talk about race, sometimes we talk about, I don't know, we talk about a lot of different things. Sometimes we just talk about who our anime husbandos and waifus are, but hopefully we will have more to talk about than that. Yes, so I apologize in advance. I've been doing content for the last like 5 hours straight, so I'm a little brain dead. But yeah, this panel, I started this panel in 2013. And the reason why I started this panel was because I took a motion capture class with a director, and he was giving us like a laydown of like a typical casting breakdown situation. And he started it by being like, yeah, there's like the CIA agent who's kind of stoic and keeps to himself, and then there's the medic who's very quick-witted, kind of a smarmy butthole, and then there's, he did not use those exact words, and then there's the a Asian chick who can speak Mandarin and a black guy. And I was like, well, where are their defining features? Why do these other two characters, who are obviously white and male, have descriptors? And then when we talk about outside of that white male default, why do we boil these characters down to just their physical attributes? And we see this sort of thing reflected in media a lot. I mean, you hear the phrase token black guy or token Asian, token female. And those sorts of decisions are, I'm sorry, the reason why a lot of times we have those token ethnic characters is because studios think that if you have a cast with more than one person of the same race that isn't white, that it becomes a project for that demographic, if that makes sense. So when you hear people talking about marketing to a general audience, 9 times out of 10 they're talking about white people, white males typically. Which is unfortunate, because I feel like, especially in film, like TV is starting to branch out, and I think part of that reason is that we're seeing the internet take over more and more of entertainment. So you're seeing a lot more people move their content from cable TV to the internet. So and that's where a lot of profitability goes. But other demographics are not quite making that shift as quickly. So I think that's why we're starting to see shows like Empire or Fresh Off the Boat or Blackish, like a lot more TV shows aimed towards the non-general demographic or whatever. But movies haven't quite caught up yet. Either when it comes to race or when it comes to gender. I'm going to throw out really depressing statistics. Sorry, my brain's already like, whoa, bright lights. Women have typically have been kind of not purposefully, but let me start with this. All speaking roles in movies made between, I think the number was like 2012 and 2015, I think it was UCLA or USC surveyed 500 movies that were made between those 5 years, and they found that of all the speaking roles, women comprised only 28% of all speaking roles. That does not mean protagonists, that means speaking roles. So somebody who says, "Can I take your order?" is included in that 28%. And there are more statistics where it talks about like whether or not those women were presented sexually, or whether or not they were presented like half naked or in different states of undress and blah, blah, blah. But the fact that only 28% of women on a movie set, 500 movie sets, were given like the opportunity to speak means that, what is it, 72% or something like that? It's it's just dudes. Dudes comprise 78% of all dialogue in movies. Obviously that differs depending on the genre. And then when you look behind the camera, the numbers get even more dismal. Women are, a survey that was taken in 2016 found out that female directors had dropped from 9% to 7% of all of the top grossing movies released in 2016. 7% of all top grossing movies were directed by women. That's an insane number, especially when you take into account that women enter into film academies at the same rate as men, pretty much. I think the number is somewhere in the high 40 percentile. But they just are not being given the same opportunities upon leaving that even playing field that men are. So that's why a lot of them don't go on to direct these movies. I mean, people were talking about Patty Jenkins being seen as a risk when she was tapped to direct Wonder Woman. But the thing that nobody really talked about was Kong, Skull Island, the movie that came out a couple years ago. That movie was also directed by a man who had only made, because Patty Jenkins released one movie and it was an independent feature, and I think it made somewhere in the realm of $80 million or something like that. And then Kong Skull Island, which came out somewhat close to her movie release as well, he had also only released one film, and that one made like $60 million or something like that. So but when the movies were coming out, the buzz that was leading up to these pictures were like, people were just kind of talking about Kong Skull Island, but there were articles being written about whether or not Patty Jenkins was a risk for the series. And I hear that word used a lot when it comes to people who are outside of that white male typical demographic, directing, writing, doing any of that stuff. We hear them always talk about how it's a risk to give big projects to these people. And I remember hearing this phrase too, uttered in terms of changing races in superhero movies and stuff like that. I remember somebody, because when Iron Man 2 came out, no, 3. The one with the Mandarin, and Ben Kingsley was playing the Mandarin, and before that movie came out, people were arguing about whether or not it was okay, quotes, to cast Ben Kingsley as a character named the Mandarin, who in the original Iron Man was admittedly kind of stereotypical, I think, Chinese character. But people were saying, oh, well, clearly it makes sense to change the race of the character because he was a stereotype before. And I'm like, well, you can write a character not as a stereotype and still have him played by an Asian person. Like, that doesn't make a difference. And I know in the movie, they kind of tried to play around with the fact that he wasn't actually Asian and yada yada. I don't want to talk about it. But when we were having this conversation, people were like, well, what if they tried to change the race of Captain America to black? It just wouldn't make sense. And then Sam Wilson took the mantle of Captain America, and it was... Anyway, I'm sorry, I don't feel like I'm making much sense. Am I making any sense right now?
Go ahead and ramble, we with you.
Kind of rambling, okay. Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate the faith. Oy. Anyway, long story short, I feel like the reason why we have so many huge discrepancies and these strange associations with castings and race and stuff like that is because people have these subconscious associations with what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be a transgender person, or what it means to be a black person. And so they think that people who belong to those groups can only exist within a certain parameter of words. And these these basically dictate how I guess these people are treated in real life, because especially in our culture, in American culture, I feel like our culture is very driven by entertainment. And the way people humanize other people and the way people like really get to know about how people outside of themselves operate is through entertainment. Like, I mean, at cons you hear it all the time, like, I played this game and it changed my life. Like, you know, I mean, watching Yuri on Ice when that came out, like that, because the protagonist of that show has anxiety and stuff like that, it gave me a better understanding that, like, okay, you know, and my husband has anxiety. So it gave me a better idea of how to communicate with my husband in a more successful way, and that changed my life. I feel like entertainment informs us on how to be better people. But when you see entertainment that only depicts non-white, non-male people in these narrow ways, then people think, oh, well, of course all black people are violent, because they only see them playing criminals or prisoners, or of course all Asian people are smart, because they only see them, you know, in like mathematician things and all that other stuff. So I feel like that's what limits us in terms of creating better portrayals for, oh God, sorry. This is heavy subject matter, and this is not an appropriate time to do that. But anyway, I'm so sorry. This is a discussion, so if you guys have anything that you would like to add to what I'm saying, please raise your hand and save me from this hell. Sure, what would you like to add?
I just want you to take a, okay, that mic's off.
There should be a button on the top, a little switch, and then flip it towards the on.
Look at that. Hey, is this on yet?
It'll take a second. Can we get this mic on?
There it goes. That turned it on. Now it's got to warm up.
Yeah.
There it goes.
Haha.
I just wanted to say you're doing a great job. Hang in there. I have this issue where I have to stand up every few minutes, so it's not like I'm leaving or being disrespectful. I just have to watch how it's
Sure.
Okay, you're doing a good job. Just keep doing it.
Thank you. You know, why don't we? I'll talk about a game that I really like, and I actually just found. I'm really excited because I just found out the last season of it's coming up. But how many of you guys have played Walking Dead, the Telltale Walking Dead game? Yeah, it's good, right? I love that movie, but not movie. I love that game, but I really like that game. I like to use that game as an example of like what to do right, and honestly, like. No, I'm not going to get diverted. Okay, here we go. We're talking about Telltale. All right. Whew. All right. So Telltale. I love that game because it has such a hugely diverse cast of characters, and I don't just mean that in terms of like the characters' races, which of course that is one of the factors, but also their personalities are so different. Because the lead character, his name is Lee, and he's a married man. He's a college professor. He's kind of even-tempered, does well in a panicked situation. He becomes the father figure to this girl as they travel and blah, blah, blah. And he also just so happens to be a black man. And I like that I have so many things that I can list off about him as a person before I mention the fact that he's black. Because I feel like in a lot of, like I was saying, when you have, especially on movies or TV shows, when you get back into the token territory, it's very frustrating because it enables lazy writing to have just a token character to fill in that stereotypical niche that you need to fill. But yeah, so Lee is a black gentleman, and then he becomes a father figure to Clementine, who is half Asian, half black as well. They hang out with white people who there's a part where they're trying to break into a barn. And you know what I'm talking about. They're trying to break into a barn, and the white dude goes like, "Can't you pick the lock?" And Lee goes like, "Why would you think I could pick the lock?" And he goes, "'Cause you know, you're urban." And it's like, it pokes little fun, like those are interactions that you just don't really see if you write from like the default white male lens. Which is why, personally, I like advocating for a more diverse storytelling. Like, there's nothing wrong with white dudes or white people in general creating content. The problem lies when only white people are creating the majority of content, because then you only get content from that point of view. I mean, there's an artist in the artist alley who's in this main hallway out here, and like his art has such an opinion. And it has such an opinion because he's a very, like, I mean, I only met him very briefly, but I already know that he's a bisexual man who, like, has experience with depression and stuff like that because of the subject matter that he decides to paint. And he paints characters in ways that heterosexual men do not. He paints men in ways that heterosexual men do not, because we heterosexual men don't look at men that the same way that maybe I would, or a bisexual man would, or a homosexual man would. And of course, depending on that person's preference, that's when you start seeing all sorts of body diversities. Like, that's what I like advocating for. I'm not taking anything away from anyone else. Yes, but yeah, I like Telltale. Does anyone have anything to say about things maybe that are bothering them? Yes, I see a hand.
There's a mic. There's a mic.
Yeah, you could come up to the mic if you want, or just project nice and loud.
It'll help my exercise routine if I take it too. Yes.
So I struggle with anxiety and depression, and for the longest time, since it's not very often portrayed in the media, I thought it wasn't very normal. From like 5th to halfway through 8th grade, I thought I was just weird and not normal. But then around end of 7th grade, I started reading a lot, and I read books with like characters in it who had anxiety and depression and all that. Like mainly in Harry Potter, Harry has like some issues, but he's still a great person and a great character. So I realized maybe I'm not alone, and I told my parents, and now I'm like getting help and I feel a lot better. So when it's portrayed in media, I feel like I'm not an outcast, and I really like that.
Yeah.
That's nice.
It definitely creates a sense of solidarity, especially when a creator is creating something that's very personal to them. Like my lesbian experience with loneliness. I don't know how many of you guys have read that manga, but it was written by, let me come get that microphone from you. It was written by a woman who, thank you. She didn't really understand her own feelings. She didn't really know what being gay was. And like, I kind of had that point, or that revelation when I was younger too. Like, I remember realizing I was bisexual when I was like driving an old pickup truck delivering pizza, and I was stopped at a stoplight, and I was like, I like boys and I like girls. Is that a thing? I guess it's a thing. I don't know. But like, I didn't know that bisexual was a thing until like much later on past that. So it's very comforting to like see other people experiencing the same things that you are, you know? I mean, and also on the topic of like depression and anxiety, like my husband my husband's a little Karibo, and he makes a series on YouTube called We're Still Here. And he uses that to talk about like his daily struggles with depression and anxiety, and how he feels and thinks, and how it makes him feel and think. And even just having him vocalize those thoughts out loud has helped people kind of realize like, oh, you know, this is like what's going on with me, and maybe I should get help, like you said. So yeah, that's a good point. Yes, front row.
I think it's also good to see representation of other cultures outside of your own.
Where you at? Okay. I just noticed that the battery is running low. It's okay for now, but it's running low.
I think it's important also to see representation outside of your own personal self too, to open up a dialogue in a way. Like, my husband is from a really conservative family, and he says since we've been dating and we married and everything that he's like not like he was at all, because he'd never met gay people. He'd never really interacted with a lot of African American people. He'd never really like gotten out much, really. And so seeing them represented on television, he'll say something, I'm like, no, that's not actually right, and you know, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll research stuff, and just seeing different cultures on television is really important. Like Bones, the show Bones, if you ever watched that. I think it's a really good example of like not being normal, because you know, she's in charge of the whole lab. The lab director is in like, you know, female and African American, and then they have like people from all sorts of cultures as interns, but she bosses men around regularly. And,
Hell yeah. I love bossing men around.
Right, and so it's interesting to watch the different dynamics that are written into shows like that, like Law and Order SVU, and like these are shows that I know are popular with a lot of females, because we're like,
yeah. Well, it's nice to see women in positions of authority. Like, and I think it's funny because after watching Star Wars The Last Jedi, like my husband and I were talking, and we were kind of laughing about the fact that like Poe is just about every angry dude on the internet who just automatically assumes that a woman has nefarious purposes behind what she does. Like, and sometimes, like, you know, even the best people will slip up. Like, I hate to say it, but I have white person moments all the time. Like, and sometimes, you know, dudes will have dude moments. We all have the moment. I don't know why I was saying that. I'm brain dead. Did somebody else have anything to say? I thought I saw another hand. Yes, the back. Yeah, thank you.
Coming.
With the foxtails.
With 4 tails. She's got 4, I tell you, she's got 4.
Tall tails.
So I'm agendered, which is kind of a relatively new term to come into the light. And there aren't really many characters out there like that. But I know that in Ouran High School Host Club, Haruhi Fujioka has openly said throughout the anime, I don't care if you see me as a boy or a girl, so they kind of are non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always identified with that, and I've always appreciated that, and I've always kind of identified with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really nice seeing that in the open and in a popular anime.
Yeah. Well, and I have never understood, like, why people hang on to their gender so tightly. Like, personally, I identify as what I was born with, but ultimately, like, my gender doesn't make me who I am. I am who I am, and, like, okay, there's a vagina attached to it. Great. Like, I don't know. But it is interesting to see characters who just not necessarily, well, Haruhi just doesn't really care because Haruhi's like, give me a book. I just want to read and hang out by myself. But yeah, Yuri Kotsky actually, like, I mean, there is a theoretical argument to be made that he identifies as non-binary because he adopted more feminine gesticulations or movements for his ice dancing routine. So that was interesting to see because I know that, like, my husband has, like, talked a lot to me about how he doesn't like how narrow and restricting masculinity can be. Like, because toxic masculinity especially, I feel like Mad Max is a very interesting, like, examination of how potentially toxic masculinity can be because, you know, if you're driven by bloodlust and rage and everything else and war, of course you're going to find yourself in this wasteland of nothing. And, yeah, I don't know. Interesting. I don't know what. Anyone else have anything they want to add? Yes, you. Looking around.
Yeah.
Not the imaginary person behind you, you.
When you were saying about, like, when you used to play, like, Telltale and they have representation that's so much better than how they do in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do you think that a small studio of, like, you know, these little game developers can make something that is so much more real than what Hollywood is presented? Because, like, I love how some games, they, like, it makes it more believable. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you have all this character and then you find out, oh, you know, they're gay or
Yeah.
this and that.
Yeah.
And it's like in Hollywood, the whole thing is like, I'm gay, this is the whole movie,
Mm-hmm.
is that I'm gay, or it's the stereotypical, you know, gay
Yeah.
guys around. Like, why do you think
I
it's
think
more advanced in that?
the problem is that the problem with Hollywood using the film industry is that there's too much money. So people who make, because movies used to be about making art. Movies used to be a primarily like feminine, like female-dominated field until men found out that they could profit off of it, and that's when women started getting kicked out of the industry in its infancy. Like, we're talking like making backyard movies and stuff like that. But I think once you get into like these $170 million movie projects, there's just too much risk involved for these executives to see that, oh, maybe having a black protagonist actually doubles my market demographic instead of just like, oh, well, we need to go with the safest bet. you know? So they see things in terms of keywords. They don't see projects for the individual pieces that they are. Like when Sherlock Holmes came out, the movie with Robert Downey Jr., they were talking about greenlighting a Leonardo da Vinci project because they were like, oh, people like historical action. And it's like, no, people like Guy Ritchie's weird direction, and people like Robert Downey Jr. And also Jude Law is really hot with that mustache. So like, speaking of stereotypes, sorry, I'm thirsty. Thirst is real. But yeah, so like, but Leonardo da Vinci, like, and also, I'm sorry, he was totally gay with his assistant, and like, they're never gonna touch on that in that corner. Get away from that. But anyway, too much money, that's the problem. Because a smaller studio means smaller investment, means less risk at the end of the day. And I mean, and I think obviously they prioritized well because they did not prioritize the visuals really that much at all. And even some might argue the gameplay itself, it was not super prioritized because, I mean, Telltale games are all pretty much the same no matter what you do. You don't need, it's not revolution, they don't change the engine a whole lot. But so that meant that they could really focus on the script. And also like, movies kind of have the disadvantage of like, you only have an hour and a half to 2.5 hours to tell that story. Whereas like with Walking Dead, you have 2 hours to 3 hours to tell this part of this whole story that you want to tell. So yeah, yes.
Touching on toxic masculinity that's part of what you're dealing with when you're dealing with big budget movies. You have, in America particularly, you have touch deprivation of men. Men cannot express, it is outside the realm of what we consider socially acceptable in a heterosexual cisgender male's life, to have those sort of touch relationships with other men. You don't see American men even hug on each other like you would in Europe. So you don't branch out that way in those movies. The whole prophet thing, they want to appeal to those straight cisgender men that they see as their market. And they are not open to the fact that, oh, well, if we include these things, we're expanding our market. All they see is that, oh no, we might narrow our market and we might offend some, straight white dude.
Yeah. Which is, it's so silly because there's sort of this unspoken expectation that women will go see a man movie, but men will not go see a woman movie. But also, like, what woman movies are there? Yeah, like chick flicks? I don't even like chick flicks. Come on, who are those made for? Like, who likes any of those protagonists? How did any of those women get those beautiful men? I don't get it. Ugh. Anyway, I'm still bitter about Amy Adams getting that one guy in Leap Year, but what do I know? But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like and when we say, and toxic masculinity does not mean that all masculinity is toxic, because Nick Offerman is a perfect example of non-toxic masculinity. He's very open about his relationship with his wife, and he loves and supports her, and he is a carpenter. He's very manly, but he's also like, he doesn't feed into like toxic masculinity, which is seeing female or anything feminine as lesser, or seeing touch as something that is not acceptable or masculine, and reacting violently to something that that you might not necessarily agree with because you don't know how to express yourself because you aren't allowed to express yourself, if that makes sense.
Where the only acceptable forms of displays of emotion are aggression, or assertiveness, or being in charge.
Yeah.
If you aren't playing to those roles, then oh no.
Even affection is like kind of violent. Guys more likely to walk up to another guy and punch him in the arm. I love you, man.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too because as a woman who because like I'm huge, I'm a monster. I shed my mother's skin. I was a big baby and I'm a big woman. Some might say I'm still a big baby, but like sometimes I'll smack dudes, like playfully, not be like, do what I say, but like, Josh and you, whatever. Or I'll display, I'm a more assertive and direct person, and they react so a lot of dudes are taken aback because they just don't know how to respond to me. And I feel like that's because they just don't, they're so viewing this world through this like either or lens of like, okay, women are supposed to behave this way and men are supposed to behave this way. And I realized that like that sort of mentality also kind of like fed into my career a little bit because I was so nervous about existing outside of this sphere of what is acceptable femininity that I wasn't taking the risks that I needed to in performances that could have been better informed by more tomboyishness, if that makes sense. Yeah? Huh? I don't know. Am I still speaking English?
Yes.
Thank God. In the back. Wait, are you raising your hand?
We got one here. He's been up. His hand's been up.
Oh, you? Okay, wait, whose hand's been up?
His hand's been up a while.
His?
Yeah, I can see better because you got the light.
Oh, right, yes. Okay, you.
Thank you. I don't mean to interrupt things. Something that I've wondered about for quite some time, and maybe you can answer my question. As far as you know, has anybody ever asked Japanese women about how they feel about their portrayals in manga, in anime? I know that most of it tends to be very traditional or very stereotypical. And I'm just wondering what the Japanese mother thinks about the entertainment that her children is receiving.
Yeah, I don't know personally. My expertise lies mostly on the West Coast. Although I do know that behind the scenes, women have difficulty breaking into the industry because it's very male dominated. Something that is interesting though is the difference in how the Japanese portray their women as opposed to how Americans portray their women. And I feel like a lot of that is kind of dictated by, I don't know, I guess differences in sexuality and acceptable roles in society, I guess. Because if you notice, like a lot of, they have a much wider variety of female characters in Japan, but they all, when they have that variety, they all still kind of hit those little check boxes.
Yeah.
Like the tsundere, the yandere, the whatever, the dure.
There are a lot of archetypes.
Yes, exactly. There are far more female archetypes in Japan than there are over here, I feel like. Although, that are utilized more actively. How about that?
Maybe they've been doing it longer.
Maybe. I mean, we could be doing it wrong for all we know. I don't know, but
Longer.
oh yes, they have been.
Thousands of years.
That's true. That's true. Any other comments, questions? Did you, James? Did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, runner.
I need it.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, share some BS that happened to me back when I was in high school. I went to a majority white high school, and I used to love acting from like elementary school to middle school. But when I got to high school, the director of all the plays and stuff was always like, no, I don't have a person. It's like, I don't have a role for you. I don't have a role for you. And it turns out that he didn't want to play any role. He didn't want to put any black people in speaking roles.
Oh my God.
And turns out he said some really racist shit to me in class one day. And the next play he did was Othello.
Did he hire a white person for that one too?
One black person.
Woo! Victory! Wow, way to break that glass ceiling. Yeah, that's fun. You know, honestly, like, voiceover casting is so strange. Like, especially when it comes to like because obviously whitewashing is something that's very I know that's not necessarily relevant to what you were saying, but whitewashing is a big thing in Hollywood. A lot of people are giving annihilation crap for whitewashing a character, but as far as I know, that character wasn't described until the second book or something, and that wasn't even released while they were making this movie. Anyway, but like Avatar, or in the case of Ben Kingsley, or I mean, we can all think of a
Ghost in the
million
Shell.
characters that were supposed to be a different race and then ended up not being that race. But
Dragon Ball.
yeah, Dragon Ball. And technically Death Note, although I kind of don't count that because L is black, so that's like, they did try at least. But it always makes me so angry whenever people act like, oh, casting should be merit-based. Well, it's already not merit-based because so many of these casting notifications that go out, like, they specify race, first of all. So technically, if you want to get real technical, the best person is not getting the job because, in my opinion, the best person, it doesn't matter what race there is, depending on the story, obviously. I don't want to cast a white person as a slave in like the Civil War or something. That would not be very appropriate. But let's talk about The Walking Dead. Why is the majority of the cast especially in the early episodes of The Walking Dead, why are they all white? They're in Atlanta. That doesn't make any sense. Or DC, like, I wish that like they would keep actual city demographics in mind when casting these shows, you know?
They had Glenn.
Huh?
They had Glenn.
What? Lynn?
The Asian guy.
Glenn.
Oh yes, yeah, the one Asian guy, yeah. I like how they only had like one non-white person at a time, and they would like get killed, and then another non-white person would come up.
They had the Mexican family, but they left. There you go.
Oh, I see. They probably were like, this show is not accurate. I don't know. I watched the first episode of The Walking Dead, and I was really bored. So, was she? Oh, I don't know. It's been several years. Does anyone have anything else they want to add? Yes, next to the blue-haired person. Is that red hair? Red shirt. Red and white shirt.
Hold on a second, coming right at you.
Oh, Team Rocket. Yeah, Jesse. I'm kind of blind.
So as an artist, I've always been identified as a black artist or as a black creator. I try to separate myself from that, but just because I make black influenced artwork, because that's where I'm from, that's my culture, people seem to isolate me into a bubble. But when I look at the world, it's not white art, it's not Asian art, it's just art. So why is the stuff that I create or my friends create separated or different or put into a different class? Like, it's not as what's the word I'm thinking of? As high?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And like, I totally get the frustration because like, in an ideal world, we should not be celebrating or singling out the fact that a woman did something or a black person did something or an Asian person did something. The sad thing is that like, unless we specify these things, I feel like it's not as visible, so people don't think it's as big of a problem. Like, I agree with you. I do think that art should be art, and it shouldn't necessarily matter who made it. But at the same time, I do think that having descriptors attached to the creator can potentially inform the viewer a little bit more about that creator's point of view. So I think if the creator has stuff that's strongly influenced by their culture. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, ultimately I think it's important to do whatever makes you most comfortable, but I totally understand your frustration. Because we have situations in the voice acting world where it's like, well, we have white characters and non-white characters. And there's been a big push recently to make sure that we try and cast as accurately as possible to the characters' races, which brings up the question, why should it matter? It's voiceover and anyone should be able to do these voices. But then you run into a situation wherein white people are pretty much only voicing white people and the only people of color available, and the people of color are not getting any roles at all because usually people of color don't voice white characters. It's very rare that that happens. But then, if you make a big push for people of color to be cast appropriately, racially appropriate, then they only get pigeonholed in those roles and they don't get the opportunity as much to voice white characters because that's on the forefront of their mind. So it's like a turd or a douche sandwich, you know what I mean? Like, or a turd sandwich or a douche. Like, do you want a crappy amount of work that is very singular, or do you want no work? And a friend of mine too, like she's having to decide whether or not she wants to change her last name because she has an Asian last. She was born in the U.S., has lived in the U.S. her entire life. She does not speak. Her family is Japanese, but she doesn't speak Japanese, and her agents are only sending her Asian roles or Asian accented roles. And she can't do an authentic Asian accent because she's not I mean, she is authentically Asian, but you know what I mean. She's not like from those countries. So they're so desperate to cast that these agents are just limiting their own talent pool and limiting the amount of money that they can make because they don't want to think outside the box and submit people for races that are not their own. Does that make sense? Did I make sense there? Cool. Glad somebody understood me. But yes, I understand. Sorry. Huh? Yes.
In mainstream media, usually the default is white male.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about an artist, if it's anything other than a white male and they're talking about it in mainstream media, then they automatically add a tag, female artist, Asian artist, black artist. So that part of it is that. The other thing is, if you're creating art that's specific to a culture, there's a tendency to make it sound, to be sure that it's authentic. They say, oh, it's, African American art painted by an African American artist. So part of it is a tagline like that, but certainly in mainstream media, if you say John Doe, the assumption is that John Doe's a white guy. Unless you add the tagline, John Doe, the African American, John Doe, oh, John's a female, John Doe the female. So they do that in mainstream media as well.
Any additional thoughts on that? Yes, second row.
Thank you. I'd like to add Overwatch as part of the discussion with how diversity can help out in just media in general with people of color and women, because when you kind of contrast Overwatch with how a lot of first-person shooters are in the previous generation, most notably Call of Duty, then you see kind of how the wide kind of difference between the two. And I'm not knocking Call of Duty because I used to play a lot of it too, but Overwatch was such a breath of fresh air when I first tried it out, because it's just the whole cast is like a wide array of, like, half the cast is women, like all the characters are like different colors of the rainbow. And
We got a monkey?
yeah, and yes, and with Zenyatta with the Omnix and Ashley with the robot. You just have a variety of characters to play, all of them with different types of gameplay, and all the characters in different types of, in all kinds of countries and all kinds of personalities with them, and it's just kind of striking against, again, Call of Duty. And I feel like that with Overwatch came out at a time when I thought that first-person shooters were getting really stagnant, and then here comes this game with a wide array of different characters with different types of styles, so it has a variety that caters to anybody, like literally anybody. Like for the people who come from the Call of Duty or Halo type games, they can have their Soldier 76, but for anyone who wants to be a healer, they could choose Mercy, or you could choose a different type of healer, not just the typical healer. You could choose Ana, who is a sniper healer. Like, what other game could you have a sniper healer than Overwatch? And then go also add it to Ana. What other game can you play as a 61-year-old woman as a sniper, or a bodybuilder like Zarya as one of the heroes, or a cocky, just pro gamer like Diva, with how she was allegedly like a StarCraft player before she donned the mecha to help out with fighting the Omnix. So you just have this whole wide array of just variety everywhere, and I think that's a huge reason why it became an instant success when it came out in 2015, because you have a game that I believe appealed to everybody, and not just the dude bro shooter stereotype that I feel that too many other people in the game publishers in the game industry wanted to go when they saw Call of Duty was making all this money. It's like, we need to make our own Call of Duty as well. But they weren't getting the same type of numbers because Call of Duty already had its audience. But you have this completely underserved audience with Overwatch.
Yeah.
And then it just had a little bit for everybody, for everyone of different ages, with everyone with different races, nationalities, and I think it's great that it succeeded in the industry, because in an industry where sometimes the female characters don't get the recognition they deserve. Well, a game with a female character in the forefront, like they find that it's too much of a risk. that Overwatch just proves how much BS it is, because he's like, here's this game that caters to literally everybody, and
Yeah.
it succeeds with flying colors.
I do feel like the tide is turning. Like in the last few years that I've hosted these discussions, like there have been several like major successes that were, you know, I mean, you have Overwatch, and then you have Wonder Woman, which was DC's most profitable movie, and probably their best, but that doesn't say much. Sorry, I hate DC. And then Black Panther, obviously, as well, proved that these demographics are not niches. These are people who are starving for content. And I'm just glad that the numbers are adding up. But yeah, I mean, Zarya is literally the only reason why I started playing Overwatch, and now I play it like every day. And thank you. I don't know if we want to encourage playing video games all the time, but yeah, I mean, Zarya, like I saw her and I was like, oh, she's so hot, and now I'm like, I want to look like that. So, but yeah, like it's great, and also Gwendolyn Christie too, like. I've seen a lot, people are now like comparing me personally to those characters and are thinking of me more and when they're casting for things because those characters exist. So having more women present in entertainment means that more women work, and then the more women work, the more women inspire other people to create more women. It's great. And the same, I mean, you apply any label to a person and that is true, and it perpetuates itself. One thing that does bother me, and the pendulum is starting to swing. I'm not going to say it's swinging too far or anything, but when people market something based only off of the gender, or the sexuality, or the whatever label belongs to this person, like you were saying earlier about like black art, like, I mean, if the fact that you are a woman is not relevant to this project, why are you bringing it up? Like, I mean, Wonder Woman was a big deal because it was the first time a female director had ever been attached to a superhero project and like one of that budget. It was tremendous. But at the same time, like I've seen movies being marketed, like independent, much smaller projects, being like, this was made by a queer female person of color director, and I'm just like, okay, but what's the movie about? I don't care about I care about the director, but ultimately I just want to know that a good story or a good product is being made, and if it was made by someone who is outside of the default, then amazing. But yeah, do we have more? Did you have something you wanted to add, James?
She's had her hand up over here.
Oh, okay, yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to talk a minute about Black Panther because that was amazing. Just like all the females were just so amazing. Like the main one, like, you know, they had conflict with each other that wasn't centered around a man. You know, they were just like, yeah, he had something to do with her choice, but at the same time, you know, she said like, well, screw him, I'm, you know, for Wakanda. And it was just an amazing thing. The costumes were great. The women just had so much autonomy in it. And behind the camera, there were lots of women of color and like just like involved in it. I just thought that was like, when I looked into like the behind the scenes stuff, I was really impressed with it. I thought it was cool.
I love how much of a love letter to Africa that movie was. Like, I mean, and my favorite part of that movie was the Afrofuturistic architectural designs. Like, because, you know, I don't know, like, it was just something very different. Like it's structure that you don't see very often in skylines, let alone super hyper modern structures like that. It was really cool. I just liked how different Black Panther felt in every way. And I feel like a lot of that, the reason why it was so different is because it had such a different team of people on it from all of the other superhero movies, which are like the same anymore. I'm so tired of superhero movies.
I read an article about what's that guy, Martin Freeman?
Yes.
His character, and like they were kind of giving him crap because they're like, oh, he's like, how can they do a token white person? And I'm just like,
how could we do a token black person for the last 200 years?
And the reasoning behind it though was funny because they didn't think that white people would come see the movie if there wasn't at least one white face in the movie. And I just like that was the whole article was about that. And I'm just like, that's ridiculous, but
It's how they think, though. It's for sure how they think.
It's like they make assumptions based on what they think is true, but not pay attention to what's actually true. Like they'll have the numbers in front of them, and they're still going to go with what they feel.
Yeah, well, and like part of the reason I don't think they understand marketing's role in all of this. Like, of course, movies that are made by smaller black studios are going to see a smaller return because they have a smaller marketing budget. So fewer people see the project, and fewer people go to pay money to see the project because they don't even know it exists. Like a lot of games that are led by female protagonists are not as profitable because they have a fraction of the budget of the male-led projects. So yeah, it's like how can you make money if you aren't given money to make money? Entertainment is a frustrating circle. In the back.
Coming.
Sending him on a walk.
Oh, you? Okay.
I still think the gaming industry is still lacking a little bit behind. We're making some progress. That's something we've looked forward to. One of the things I can focalize on is Tomb Raider, perfect example. It used to be very over-sexualized back, 90s, early 2000s as, was Angelina Jolie had to be this epitome of, this beautiful woman otherwise, but then you get the neatier, grittier type, Lara Croft, and these games have been phenomenal. Obviously that's a step in the right direction. We haven't had very many games with people of color, and that's what needs to be changed. But like I said, we're working towards that. So
yeah, I do think the gaming industry is trying, but holy crap, gamers are so obnoxious, and I include myself in that.
Right.
Like, I mean, I play games, and I've played games for a really long time, but like the whole Gamergate thing shows that we are not mature enough for our toys, regardless of what side we were on. Like, holy crap. But yeah, like. I do, and what is it? The new Uncharted game with Chloe and the other lady. Like that's really cool. Like I was watching that trailer when they announced it, and I was like, "Crap! I'm watching two hot ladies talking about treasure. This is great." The real treasure is Chloe's butt, but that's my opinion. But yeah, I do think that we're starting to pull in the right direction. But I think the fan base is what's holding us back there, because I do feel like. It's so frustrating because like women do comprise of like half of the gaming market, but anytime the ESA did a survey on it and there were at least 40% of all gamers. But whenever you bring up that statistic, people are so easy to dismiss it by saying, oh, they don't play real games. And it's like, what the hell is a real game? I can play BioShock on my phone. Like, phone games are real games, I'm sorry. Just because like we prefer to play mindless click games doesn't mean that somebody spending 109 hours on Love Live is not cooler than me spending 100 hours on Skyrim. Like, it's all investment, it's all time. But for whatever reason, people just don't respect that. I don't know.
We'll get there.
Yeah, one day. Any other comments? Middle here. The blonde gentleman with the black sweater.
I was gonna ask, with like the Love, Simon that just came out. It was a very marketed movie as like this is a gay love story, and it was a true telling. It was a great movie, fantastic. But as you were saying earlier, does it detract from that by marketing it as like a gay love story? Is it more important to have like a really solid representation movie, or a movie where it's not a defining characteristic?
That's a very good question, honestly, because I don't think that's something that's very debated, but I don't think it has to be debated as much as it is. Because honestly, I think Love, Simon is a very important movie, and that is also because of the fact that it's being marketed as a gay movie. Because we need to have gay romance movies. We need to have bisexual romance movies. But we also need to have Rosa Diaz, who is a bisexual cop on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and it's not really something that matters. I think that in a perfect world, we would live in this landscape of diversity amongst all storylines. Because the problem is that right now everything's very heteronormative and cisgender. And there's only so many stories that you can tell within those two realms. I think that right now, I'm very, very happy to have Love, Simon. But if they try and like only make gay movies with gay characters like Love, Simon from now on, that's where the problem starts. I mean, it's not really a problem for gay people to have more representation, but you know what I mean, very narrow representation. But like Star Wars might not be seen as a victory for people of color, but it totally is, and women, because I mean, you have Rey, you have Poe, you have Finn, like space Guatemalans, that's awesome. I never thought I'd see space Guatemalans in my lifetime. But I think it's important for us to have movies that exist within the suffering narrative of these labels. So like, Black people a lot of the time, whenever they're given big, meaty roles, it's like 12 Years a Slave, or The Butler, or, you know, things that revolve around white guilt, the suffering narrative of slavery and civil rights. But Black people deserve escapism too. Like, it's important to see stories that reflect who you are, but it's also important to see stories that have nothing to do with who you are at all, and just enjoy yourself. So, right now, I'm happy with Love, Simon. We'll see. We'll see from there. Glasses. Sunglasses. Yeah. No. Behind. Black tank top. Yes. Waving.
I'm totally quoting Pink here, but like, I want being gay to be just as, not put off, but like, people just don't mind as much as when you tell them your star sign, like, hey, I'm an Aries, like, people should not care. They'd be like, not that they don't care, but they'd be like, okay, cool, that's your business.
Yeah.
And also, like, I go to a very small, liberal-minded school that is very accepting, and people are like, oh, you're gay? Cool. Oh, you're trans? Cool. Oh, you feel like you're a woman and you want to use the girls' bathroom? Okay. Because for a very open, accepting school, and I'm very lucky to have that, because even the teachers are just like, okay, good for you. Because we're just to the point where it's like, okay, yes, we're happy you're you, but it's you. You can be who you want. It doesn't change our lives, so we don't feel the need for it to change yours, other than, oh, you just love someone else. Okay.
Yeah, interestingly enough, like, I feel like we're starting to get to a point now where gay is almost acceptable. Like, it's almost like a, oh, okay, whatever thing. But I'm seeing more and more biphobia. It's so weird. Like, there's articles about like, oh, dudes kissing dudes who are straight? No, they're bi, dummy. Like, and like, married bi women exist. Hello. Like, I never really talked about my sexuality or thought it was a big deal until, I want to say, like, in the last year, because I've just seen so many people not understand that you can be attracted to people of both genders and not want to sleep with anything and everything around you. Like, I have self-control and I don't like STDs, you know? Like,
I feel that. But like, also, I am gay, but I have a lot of bi friends, and I'm just like, okay, it's not really hard to understand. It's like liking pepperoni pizza and cheese pizza. You still love it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, I feel like people feel more strongly about people liking pineapple on pizza.
Oh, yeah. It's on the inside.
Yes.
Like cheesy crust.
Oh,
That's what matters.
I like, yeah. Front row here.
On my way.
I'm making sure to make you go across the room as much as possible. White shirt.
Please,
yeah.
I need the exercise.
Something that kind of bothers me is that, this is like about Yuri on Ice. A lot of people that I've seen online like refer to it as a yaoi, and I'm like, it's not a yaoi, it's a sports anime. There just happens to be a romantic plot point in it that happens to be between two guys, but that's not the main focus of it.
Yeah,
and a lot of people don't get that.
I wish it was a yaoi, like, that mean I'd get a little something something, but as it
Besides
stands,
a censored kiss.
yeah, and also Chris jizzing in my face. Like, I'm sorry, I just will never get over that. I love
But like people focus so much on the fact that there's a gay romance in it, and they don't realize that's not all that it's about.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's even in the industry like that was kind of, what does that say? Is that 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Am I done? I'm done! All right, good. I'm glad we're talking about Yuri on Ice. I'll wrap this up and then we'll be good. Yeah, no, there was actually like the producer and the director of Welcome to the Ballroom were going around and giving interviews, and they were talking about like, because people were obviously like, oh, ice dancing and then ballroom dancing, clearly these must be very similar. And the show people were like, oh, no, that was like about boys' love. That was a boys' love show. And it's like, no, it wasn't. It was the exact same thing, except you have a heterosexual romance and they have a homosexual romance. Like, yeah, but that's another instance of just kind of boiling down the other label to very simple, easy to digest nuggets, because people think that, I don't know, if they have to understand gay people, they will become gay. I don't know. If you do become gay, great. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, very frustrating. That's the time we have for today. Thank you for putting up with me, and thank you for talking with me.